Hi there, Alison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today we are in Chinon and we're looking at the Joguet 2016 Clos du Chêne Vert Chinon. Joguet is one of the most illustrious producers in Chinon. Today the domaine is being run by Anne-Charlotte Genet, who is the daughter of Jacques Genet, who was one of Charles's business partners and came on board at the domaine in the 1980s, and then later acquired the domaine from Charles when he retired in 1997. Anne-Charlotte is supported by winemaker Kevin Fontaine, and together they're farming around 40 hectares worth of vines in several communes across the Chinon appellation. Today we are looking at the Clos du Chêne Vert, and this is a single vineyard bottling, and the vineyard is located in the commune of Chinon, and this is arguably one of the estate's top wines. This along with Les Varennes du Grand Clos, which is another single vineyard wine, and that site is located in the commune of Sazilly on the opposite side of the Vienne River. Now, of course, we're continuing our exploration of the communes of Chinon with a little bit more detail, and today's wine is taking us to the commune of Chinon. And this is one of only two communes in the appellation that has vineyards on both sides of the Vienne River, the other being Le Bouchard. So on the south side of the river in the Chinon commune, there's a very small area of vineyards, and it's concentrated about 1.5 kilometers south of the Vienne. And here the vineyards are at a relatively lower altitude, and the soil influence here is the recent alluvial soils. These are the sandy, silty soils from the Vienne River. Now, on the opposite side of the Vienne, it is a completely different story. So the commune stretches around 4 kilometers from north to south, and then we have about 6 kilometers from east to west. And because we have the Chinon village here, which is a fair size, and there's a number of little hamlets surrounding the village, the vineyard area in this commune is a little bit more sporadic. Now the landscape of the commune undulates, so we have a lot of variability in terms of altitudes as well as aspects. So the altitudes of the vineyards range anywhere from 40 meters above sea level upwards to around 100 meters above sea level. And in terms of aspects, we have north, south, east, and west facing slopes depending on where you are in the commune. And of course these slopes and your exposure will have an influence on the type of sunshine you receive, and this will obviously have an impact on ripening. Now, in terms of the bedrock, the main bedrock influence across the commune is for the most part the upper Turonian tuffeau chalk. This is the yellow tuffeau chalk. And the prevalence of the tuffeau chalk here is why we see such a large concentration of top vineyard sites in this particular commune. Now, of course, there is a lot of variability in terms of topsoil as well as subsoil. We have some topsoils that are deeper, some shallower with various textures. And then in terms of subsoil, we have some sites where we have the chalk influence right away. In some instances, there is a gravelly subsoil, and in some cases, we find a deeper soil with more of a clay influence in terms of the subsoil. Now, where this wine is coming from, it's actually a smaller area of a larger lieu-dit called Le Chêne Vert. And this lieu-dit is about 6 hectares in total. And we are in the eastern part of the Chinon commune. We're about 1 kilometer east of the outer limits of the Chinon village, and we're just northeast of the hamlet of l'Olive. And in terms of where this clos is, and it's about a 2-hectare clos, and Joguet has exclusive ownership of this 2-hectare parcel, and it is a delineated area. You can actually see on Google Maps or Google Earth how this little clos is delineated. And we are on a rather steep southwest facing slope here, about a 20% or so grade. And this southwest slope is important because of course we're getting the stronger afternoon sunshine, which is important for ripening. But what's also important to note in terms of this slope is the altitude here. So we're between 72 meters at the bottom of the slope up to about 88 meters at the top of the slope. So you can actually see the Chinon fortress off in the distance from the top of the vineyard. Now this clos is very special and has a lot of historical significance. At the top of the slope, there is an 800-year-old holm oak tree. So the original growth of this tree was planted by the monks of the Bourgueil Abbey back in the 12th century as a marker for this very special vineyard site. Now, this vineyard was continuously planted to vine for nearly 1,000 years before phylloxera hit. And then, of course, the vineyard was all grubbed up and it was virtually abandoned until Charles came along and purchased the vineyard in 1976 for about 4,800 francs. That would have been about $1,000 US at the time, which is around $5,000 in today's dollars, which in the grand scheme of things, that's not a ton of money for a site of this caliber and with this sort of historical significance. Now, when Charles purchased this particular site, there were some vines in the ground, but he did begin to replant the vineyard right away. So in 2016, the vines would have been around that 35 to 40 or so year age mark. There's a few other things I want to note about this particular vineyard. The southwest facing slope and our location within the commune is very important. So this site actually is one of the earliest sites for the domaine to harvest, usually about 10 to 12 days ahead of Les Varennes du Grand Clos. Now, in addition to that, in terms of the soils here, we have very little in terms of topsoil, only about 50 to 70 centimeters of a silty clay topsoil, and then we hit the tuffeau chalk right after that. Now, another thing to point out, I mentioned that we're on a really steep slope, so this particular site is really sensitive to erosion. So the winery is employing organic practices as well as regenerative practices to help rebuild some of that topsoil. Finally, because of the lack of topsoil we have here and the influence of the tuffeau chalk bedrock, this site naturally yields on the lower side, around 30 hectoliters per hectare. And there's two reasons for this. First of all, we have more free draining topsoil here. And of course, that means that there's less moisture retention capacity. And then because we have this impact of the tuffeau chalk very close to the surface, there's a lot of active limestone in this site, and that restricts nutrient uptake from the vine. And two of the most important factors when it comes to yield in the vineyard is one, of course, water availability as well as nutrient availability. And in this particular vineyard, we have a bit of a deficit of both, which is why this site yields a little bit on the lower side. Now, from a winemaking perspective, all the fruit was hand-picked and it was destemmed, and fermentation takes place with indigenous yeast in wooden vats, and then it does spend a decent amount of time on skins, about 4 weeks on skins, and there is some regular pump overs and punch downs during that time to aid extraction. And then élevage takes place in 1 to 3 year old oak barrels. These are 500-year-old 500-liter oak barrels, and it rests there for about 18 months or so before bottling, and then the winery will do a little bit of bottle aging prior to release as well. So let's get into this wine. The nose has a really pure fruited profile, very fresh, very pristine in terms of that fruit on the nose, like very fresh berries. It's a mix of red as well as some blue fruits, sweeter fruits I should say as well. But I'm getting a little bit of red cherry, a bit of black cherry here, a touch of like a wild blueberry note as well, maybe even a little bit of a currant undertone. And the pyrazines, I would say that they do come a bit more forward here. This is a wine I would definitely describe as a bit more earthy or savory, but they are nicely in balance, and I like the profile that they're coming through as. It's a little bit of thyme, rosemary, maybe even a touch of a mint note as well. And there is a little bit of an evergreen component as well. And I should note as well, there is a bit of a floral element to this wine. Cab Franc often has a bit of a perfume, a floral perfume to it. But this is coming through as a bit more of a peony note, I think. Now, this is really very bright, very brisk acidity. I can feel my mouth watering here. And the fruits come through, because of this high acidity, the fruits do come through with a little bit more of a tartar edge, like a bit more of that currant note comes through, a bit more of like a cranberry juice or cran ras kind of juice note coming through. And then you get into the layers here, and there is a lot of concentration to this wine and a lot of depth here. So we're getting a little bit of, there's a leathery note, there's a touch of spice here like clove, a bit of green peppercorn as well. There's even a little bit of that number 2 pencil graphite thing happening as well. And in terms of the tannins, there's a good amount of tannin here. It's sitting at a moderate level, and they're fine. They're very tightly woven, very taut, with a nice velvety texture to them, and they do have a bit of a chalkiness to the finish as well. And there is a touch of a salinity, like a saltiness to the finish, which is really quite interesting. This wine does sit a little bit more linear on the palate. It's very well defined, very well chiseled, but there's muscle here as well. It's more of a medium-bodied wine. You know, this is not full-bodied, but there's definitely muscle here, but more lean muscle, like toned muscle, as opposed to bulky muscle. Like this is a gymnast versus a bodybuilder kind of thing. But that muscle is very important here because this is giving this wine structure and ageability. And this wine is definitely one, I think, for the cellar for sure. There's something about it that comes through for me is very precise, very assertive, a little bit contemplative as well, which makes sense. You know, this wine is a top wine. This is a vin de garde. This is definitely one for the cellar. So it comes across as a bit more of a serious cuvee. Now, I've had several of the Charles Joguet wines before. This is the first time I've had Clos du Chêne Vert, and I have to say it is a winner. It's really quite delicious. If you've had this wine before, let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. Or actually, if you've had any of the Charles Joguet wines, let me know what your favorite is in the comments below. And of course, as always, I will be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.